As calls to defund the police grow louder, elected officials are starting to weigh in. Days ago, we heard from San Francisco Mayor London Breed, and now we're hearing from the chief of police. Joining us now with his thoughts on all of this is Paul Henderson. He is the executive director for police accountability in the city of San Francisco. Paul, I want to go ahead and start with some of these conversations that are taking place at the local level in regards to defunding the police.
We have heard from local leaders who have articulated that not only are they open to the idea of addressing the budget, which many of them have to because of these outside circumstances, but also to address the actual demands that are being made from communities, especially communities of color.
Are you surprised at all that San Francisco's police chief has come out in support of defunding the police departments?
I'm not surprised. I think that we have a chief that is committed to reforms, but is also wants to know how to be more efficient with the budget. Law enforcement budgets are the singular largest expense for most big cities. And I think independent of the rallies and protests and challenges about justice disparities, we're having real conversations in this country right now about how those dollars are being spent. And the ultimate goal is for us to have policing and public safety defined in a way that is race neutral.
These aren't discussions taking place just at a community level. Obviously, there's a big conversation taking place at the federal level as well. There's a lot of proposed legislation out there. The Democrats have unveiled a bill, JIPA, Justice and Policing Act. Also, the White House is saying that they have a plan. And now Senate Republicans are saying that they actually have a plan that is going to pass. So taking all of this proposed legislation into account, what can we expect?
What I would be questioning and looking for is whether or not the Republican bill that gets proposed is going to go deep enough to address race disparities. But I'm concerned about something that's not going to go as far as the bill that's already been introduced, because the standard that it sets at a national level is something that I think would be welcome right now and would go very far in addressing many of the concerns that people have about their very own communities. And all politics is local. A lot of this action is taking place on a local level, but with a guideline like this, we haven't had federal guidelines and federal leadership on these issues since the 21st century policing. And so now is the right time to be able to dive in deeply to address immunities, to address race disparities, to address use of force, to address body-worn cameras, and not just the implementation of these things, but the policies behind all of these things.
Paul, moments ago, you mentioned the 21st Century Policing Task Force. That was police reform that happened under President Obama. Were the Obama-era reforms rolled back?
What we've seen with the current administration is the agency charged with enforcing many of those reforms has shrunk, right? So that's the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice. And the Civil Rights Division has shrunk to less than half of what it was in the previous administration. And so that presents somewhat of a problem because the prosecutions that have been taking place have been in large part individual transgressions, which doesn't speak to the systemic problems associated with the justice system.
I think it's important just to take a moment and explain what qualified immunity is and how it may have led to some of the police brutality that we're seeing today.
Qualified immunity are a set of protections that are associated with law enforcement agencies, and they are actually contained in the Democrats' bill for police accountability. And so it's being rolled back in that bill, or it's being offered to be rolled back in that bill. But concurrently, and at the same time, there are 13 other cases dealing with qualified immunity in the pipeline for the Supreme Court right now. And so it's a really important issue that heretofore had not been challenged in the way that it's being challenged right now, with communities demanding that it be addressed and demanding that something happen. I think we're starting to see that by having this bill be introduced. I'm curious to see whether or not the Republican bill is going to touch qualified immunity, or if they're going to leave it for the courts to interpret, and what that's going to mean for this justice reform movement.
So, Paul, let's finish with the strength of police unions. How realistic is real reform, given that historically speaking, police unions have often tried to block it?
The movement towards justice reform and police reform is very strong, and it is not backing down, and it is running directly into the police unions. And again, I think what's important is that employers and all industries are entitled to protections and to union support. I think the issue being raised in has the action of these unions interfered with the accountability of individual officers, so that either they weren't punished in the same way that other folks would have been punished in terms of dealing with accountability and responsibility, and then what those limitations were in terms of individuals involved in transgressions, whether or not they were removed or restricted from their job, both at the locations where they're serving, but also at the locations where they move to.
Given police officers like Officer Chauvin, in his time, he had 17 different complaints against him, yet he was still on the force. How much say does a police union have in terms of protecting an officer like Derek Chauvin?
I mean, that's their job. That is part of what their purpose is. I think the conversation challenging that is, to what end, right? What is the bigger picture, and how are we supporting, or how are we opposing how the unions work and how they operate, and looking at that beyond just a case-by-case analysis. How are these behaviors, how are these decisions, and how are these dollars being spent from the police unions, and are those outcomes that communities are going to support or be opposed to? I've talked to so many officers that want change as well. Not every officer is doing bad. Not every officer is unjust. Not every officer is a racist. And, you know, we keep having these conversations where they talk about, well, there's just one bad apple. And the conversations now have to go beyond that. And these are things that we just have to be discussing, because we want to have public safety. We want to have law enforcement, but we want to have it where it's serving the communities that it's implementing public safety in. And it has to be, that service has to be to protect and serve in ways that are race neutral. Things have to change, and I think they're changing.